dat, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the Dat Confessional podcast, where we will be discussing the latest here for the New Orleans Saints, coming off a big Week 1 win against Tennessee Titans, preparing for Monday Night Football against Carolina Panthers. Obviously, big division game early on, critical, and the Panthers are the lone losers in the NFC South, but I actually fear them more than the other two NFC South teams that we'll go against this year, at least right now. I mean, what I feel like 2-3 months from now could be very different, but we will definitely have to keep an eye out on this team and definitely don't sleep on them. But we'll focus that more on Thursday's episode. Tonight, we got to give you an update on everything happening in New Orleans, go over some of the tape, some of the analytics from Week 1, what maybe this means and what they can improve on, and we'll go through all of those things. And then, of course, towards the end, answer your questions because, well, this podcast doesn't serve a point if it's not about y'all. Get some who-dats those who are here in the show early on. Lester, Nikki DeFish, TJ, Dave, Gaston, G550, Shakal, Eric, Howard, Brennan, Jack, Mr. Gerald Stevenson himself, TJ, our moderator, by the way, thank you for being here, James Griffon, Nevin Albert, William Pickney, Rudy Rock, and every other who-dat who is coming through at the early portion of our podcast. We do record this live, so if anybody does want to attend Tuesdays and Thursday nights, between 7 and 7:30 is when our start times are, and then you can hang out at every post game. Because following the game, we're going to go live, whether it's good, whether it's bad, and it's all gravy nonetheless. So let's get some quick little pieces out of the way. The New Orleans Saints did try out several different players. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is a big injury or anything. This is actually pretty normal. Until you see something actually get written down, assume it's just normal process, and this is pretty common. Now, the ones that ended up getting worked out, you had several DBs, and then, of course, you had Takkarist McKinley, who Saints fans would at least recognize the name, but Takkarist McKinley, Michael Jacobson at tight end. Then you had Cameron Brown, Cameron Dantzler, Fayon Hicks, Michael Ajamedia, and then finally Rodarius Williams, all DBs from various places across the country. Don't really think they're going to pick up anybody. But as far as injuries, there's been no update on any injuries for Alontae Taylor, for Marshawn Lattimore, for Ugo Amadi, or Paulson Adebo. If there is a change, we'll know Wednesday on our first injury report coming through the week. And we'll see what it ends up looking like. Williams is just trying to get one of them hats. Hey, shout out if you want to get one out, RevDeuce.com. Get you one of them clean Saints Who Dat Confessional hats. Rep it for the season. We don't really plug ourselves much around here, but if you do want to catch up some merch for the podcast, hoodies, t-shirt, mugs, cleanest hat in the game, including the Yankee concept, put the link in the chat, but you can go to RevDeuce.com and you can support the channel and get you some sweet merch. But the tryouts are pretty routine, not seeing anything big coming out in terms of injury. Figured we would have heard about it. The only roster move that's actually been made was the Saints releasing Jontre Kirkland, who was one of the young bucks here, who made that bottom end of the 53. But beyond that, so far, nothing that's come out for us to really worry about. We'll see. The only injury history that's actually popped up is actually about J.C. Horn for the Carolina Panthers, where he'll be unavailable for this week and probably missing about a month with a hamstring injury. So we'll just continue to watch, see how it plays out. But I am excited about Monday night. At the same time, definitely a lot that this New Orleans team needs to work out and fix out. So we'll simply have to wait and see. Now, for those that missed it, we did put out a Derek Carr film study yesterday. We'll have a different film study out tomorrow, but I felt appropriate to go ahead and focus on Derek Carr, whose stat line to start as a first-time starter with the Saints should be leaving everybody pretty happy. It wasn't perfect, but I think the biggest concern for a lot of people is going to be the amount of pressure that he was under. So, for example, we put this in the film study video, but for those who missed it, he was under pressure for 44.7% of his dropbacks against the Tennessee Titans. Titans ended up getting 4 sacks, which actually puts them in the top 10 across the league for teams starting in Week 1. But thankfully, Carr wasn't rattled too much by it. Him going 8 for 13, right at 62%, 170 yards passing, no interceptions, no touchdowns with it. So overall, didn't kill the team, but clearly that left side of the offensive line between Trevor Penning and James Hurst is an area of concern for any Saints fan watching, whether you watch the film study that we did yesterday or if you simply watch the game live. That's going to be one of the things you need to see adjusted moving forward. Not that I think that the Tennessee Titans were a bad team and simply took advantage of a New Orleans Saints offensive line that hasn't worked a lot together on that left side. Because I do think that the defensive front seven for Tennessee is a very good unit, and I think that Vrabel deserves to get a lot of credit for creating a fantastic defense overall over the past 6 years over there in Tennessee. But we'll also then add that it doesn't exactly get any easier when you have the Carolina Panthers coming up. Between Brown on the inside and Burns on the outside, you have legitimate threats that can attack both Hurst and Trevor Penning, as well as move around the line and play any position, because both those guys are extremely talented. So I'm not saying that you should disregard the level of impact that the Tennessee Titans had based on us beating them, simply putting that it doesn't get any easier. And if Derek Carr is going to be the best quarterback that he can be, he needs to be protected. Now, real quick, I do want to give some numbers out. I put this out on the website formerly known as Twitter earlier today. Here's where Derek Carr finished amongst all the quarterbacks leaving week one. He was 5th in passing yards, 10th in passer rating, had the 5th longest pass thrown, ended up having 2nd in yards per pass attempt, which is the amount of yards he created per the times he threw the ball, and 9th in the NFL in completion percentage leaving week one, while also being the 6th most sacked quarterback over the weekend. So he was able to put up pretty decent numbers in terms of the box score. I think film backed that up if you watched it yesterday. And not only did my film study have very positive things to say, Nick Underhill's film study article that he wrote yesterday as well, that I managed to get a peek at after I finished my film study, also had a lot of positives there. Big key is definitely that offensive line and how much it kind of faltered on that left side. So far, Carr looks good, but I think it's definitely going to be reliant heavily on this offensive line getting better. And I think that it's more than just pass rush as well, because pass rush is great and you want to stop it. But the New Orleans Saints were a team that was supposed to be able to stop the pass rush and be very good blocking against the run. And that was also a struggle. And it really feels like this team was missing its inside zone running scheme, because without Kendre Miller, without Alvin Kamara, that was something that maybe Jamal Williams isn't as good as. So hopefully see that change in the future as well. But overall, a win's a win, right? I mean, can't gripe too much about that. To give you an idea of where New Orleans ranks as a team, just kind of across the league. Defensively, they are the 7th best team in the NFL in points allowed, and they're the 17th team in yards allowed. Again, this is week one stats, and as a whole don't mean anything, but it is a kind of good idea to see where you are amongst your peers. 8th in yards created for an offense, but 22nd in points scored as an offense. So obviously going to have to clear that up. We talked about that in the post game where, hey, they did a great job on 3rd down, but they were 1 for 4 in the red zone, and got to convert those opportunities, even against a very good defense with Tennessee Titans. Now, we did look at quite a bit of other tape here where I looked at defense today, the film study tomorrow. I haven't decided if I'm going to do a defensive or an offensive film study. I'll probably kind of poll that one out to the Discord again. Again, benefit for those who like to interact live, getting to put forth your request there. But I mean, there's several options. There's Michael Thomas, there's Chris Olave, the receiver groups as a whole, with Rashid Shaheed having a good day. But defensively, there's a lot to look at with the base defense usage. To give you a little bit few more numbers that you don't necessarily see in the game, did get this run by and checked. New Orleans, and I talked about, remember those who listen to the podcast in the preseason, I talked about, hey, New Orleans seems to be running a lot more base defense as a team in the preseason. Would that persist? Well, in this week one game, the New Orleans Saints were in base 28.4% of the time. Now, logic dictates that you're probably going to be in a heavier set when going against Derrick Henry. So not necessarily an indicator of guaranteed future looking similar, but 28% from base, 52% from nickel, and then 19.4% in the dime. So definitely more of Zach Baum than you're used to seeing. And I think that if you watch that game, I don't think anybody was sitting there saying Zach Baum was a liability either. So you had really good performances from the corner spots. I thought Alontae Taylor did pretty well in the nickel. Not perfect, but certainly not terrible. I thought your front seven played fantastic. And then I thought your safeties also had an extremely good game between the two of them. And defensively looks really good. I thought the base was interesting to see that translate from preseason to regular season. I am curious how that might adjust to a more pass-centric offense. We'll see how DA kind of makes those as we kind of go along. But I thought that was pretty good. I thought that was nice. And speaking of guys who stood out, Kalen Saunders had a great day. Carl Granderson had a fantastic day as a pass rusher. Peyton Turner had really nice reps. Speaking of guys who get injured. But Peyton Turner had some really, really nice reps in this one, especially with the stunning in the inside. Shout out to Brian, my man Breezy, who actually seems to be doing a pretty good job early on with the twist and stunt game when we're talking tackle to end stunts, things like that, which is good to see. I don't think he's polished and perfect yet, but you definitely saw him get a lot of usage. And I talked about when it comes to him and Nate Shepard, be wary of the whole who's starting part of it. I think there's value in having the veteran there, but I'm really curious to see how quickly the rookie ends up taking some of those snaps early on. To go over the snap counts real quick for the defense, I don't go over all of them unless y'all end up wanting, but Nate Shepard was in on 51% of the snaps, which I did expect. That's something that I expect to see the rookie playing second fiddle to, but he was still there for 41%. I talked about if he manages to take off this year, and you see him really producing, you can see him getting in that 60, 70% at the very top end, whereas right now, the defensive tackle that is on the field the most any given game is going to be Nate Shepard. That was the one who added the most this past game. But other than that, I mean, defensive ends, both Cameron Jordan and Carl Granderson played over 75% of the snaps. Tano Passignon rotated in at the interior and the exterior spots. He had 43%, and then Peyton Turner only saw 7 snaps, but he flashed on those snaps. But again, health. Health is definitely a concern for Peyton Turner. Those are kind of your numbers there. Here to see how it continues moving forward. If you're curious who led the team in snaps on both sides, your safeties between Marcus May and Honey Badger, Pete Warner and Demario Davis were all on the field 100% of the time, and Paulson Adebo. Surprisingly, Marshawn Lattimore did miss a few snaps. He's only out there for 95%. And then Alontae Taylor was out there for 68%. So even in the slot position, as you can see, we talked about this, that nickel spot is still a starter where he's seeing 68%. In fact, he saw more snaps than Roach and Bond and Breezy and Passignon and Saunders and Shepard, etc. So definitely on the field quite a bit. And then Ryan Conley apparently snuck on the field for 1 snap. I don't remember that going through the study, but he was apparently there. He's apparently there. So get on through the big ones. Tate, defensively, can't really say that I noted any real struggles. I will say, and I was tempted to post it, but I didn't. There was a rep early on in the first half where Marshawn Lattimore got his ankles absolutely destroyed by DeAndre Hopkins. And I was torn on whether I included it because, one, I thought that he had a fantastic day. I thought Lattimore truly had a great game against Hopkins. And I wanted to share it. I was thinking to, share it like, hey, look, this shows that Hopkins isn't trash. Definitely hasn't fallen off the face of the earth. Still a fantastic wide receiver. And look what he did. But I was worried people might take it as me hating on Lattimore and finding a reason because people have thrown around the hater term. So I haven't shared anywhere, but it was positive for me to see because it showed that Hopkins wasn't a washed-up receiver, and it was actually Lattimore playing really, really good. And it was Paulson Adebo playing really, really well that shut him down. It wasn't a case of Hopkins just simply looked bad. It was one of those where you simply had the DBs came in and looked really crisp, and it wasn't a perfect game. There were multiple reps where the Saints front 7 bailed out the secondary because there were some miscommunications and things like that. And I think that happens for just about every team. So it's probably a little bit normal, if you will, especially early on. But in terms of as a whole, they played enough to cover each other's mistakes. When the front 7 wasn't able to get what they needed in terms of pass rush, converting on some of the twists and stunts that they did, the coverage was there. And then when you had a couple of wheel routes, for example, that blew the coverage for the Saints, well, they managed to shut it down up front quick enough before it was able to be taken advantage of by Ryan Tannehill. People are going to argue it was Ryan Tannehill, but I will also then counter-argue he's an NFL starting quarterback, and you are in week 1. Things, hopefully, continue to get better. But overall, I thought it was pretty good. That was good, guys. I mean, take happiness with that. I mean, truly, you're leaving this game where the only major disappointments were the left side of the offensive line. There needs to be improvement in every section, offensive, defensively, and special teams. But as a whole, that's why you won. And I also have got to, and I mentioned this in the Derek Carr film study, chat, I'm sorry, but we have to be fair. One man who deserves a lot of credit is Pete Carmichael. You watch this game, you go back and watch the film, look at the play calling. Pete Carmichael did a fantastic job in terms of the play calling and adjustments. Was it a perfect game? Definitely not. But in terms of was it one of Carmichael's better games that we've watched, it absolutely was. Hopefully that is a trend that continues on. And I saw a lot of things that, for me, gives me confidence that this team can take that, step in the right direction offensively. Number one was Pete Carmichael's play calling was better, but number two is the amount of control that Derek Carr had in week one. Now, that doesn't mean that I want Derek Carr to just have the ability to do whatever he wants offensively. I don't want that. But, as y'all have now seen, if you've been on Saints social media, you've seen that Derek Carr called the play. That was the Rashid Shaheed deep shot that sealed the game in the fourth quarter. That was a Derek Carr call. That was the type of thing that you didn't see Andy Dalton having the option to, or even honestly the throws to do last year with the Saints. So little things like that. It's not saying that Derek Carr is the best quarterback in the NFL, but it is certainly saying that the setup that they're going with is going to hopefully produce more success later on. And you look at the adjustments they started to make in the end of the second, going into the third, where just making it a point to get Trevor Penning more help on the left side, whether it be running back chips. So they start bringing Adam Prentice more. The tight ends roles switched from more pass receiving to more assisting and blocking. We didn't even mention Foster Moreau in terms of what he did as a receiver, but Foster Moreau was in a lot of snaps. He was in half of the snaps offensively, 32 of them. And most of them were run blocking, especially front side blocking, and trying to help out. And you saw more tight end sets happening as the game went on to help out Trevor Penning. So I thought that was fantastic adjustments. Again, it definitely isn't perfect, but in terms of what we had gotten used to with Pete Carmichael, this was definitely a much better game for both him and the team as a whole. And I think it was great to see Derek Carr having the confidence, but also having the right at his position to make some of those calls. And I think that's when teams are working out the best. So we'll see if these things trend. And I've said it many times, a single game is not enough to build a scouting report on anybody, whether it's Derek Carr, Marshawn Lattimore, Jamal Williams. It's just even the ones who struggled, Trevor Penning and James Hurst. We're going to need more reps to see, but early signs are good. Now, a couple people asked for Jimmy Graham. Jimmy was in early in the game, and one of the reasons I think you saw less of Jimmy Graham later was we need to protect Trevor Penning. So Jimmy Graham was in on the first couple drives. He ended up having 9 snaps, which is 14% of what the offense ran. But he quickly came out, and they didn't see him as much. And I think a lot of that is going to come down to the personnel issues and the blocking issues. So I don't think that it was a sign that Jimmy Graham can't do anything. I think it was simply a byproduct of the Tennessee front seven was just destroying New Orleans Saints front four, and they had to do something to adjust and stop. And part of that was, look, Jimmy Graham's going to be a guy who's mostly a red zone target, and it doesn't matter how good he is in the red zone if you can't give him the ball. So slight things there. I still believe you'll see more of that later. And, speaking of more of the later, I expected to see Taysom Hill earlier in this game that we didn't. I am okay with that. I think part of that is there's an argument to be made for you want to make sure that you're giving Derek Carr all the snaps he needs to get comfortable because, they only had one series in preseason. So you did have a little bit of a late entry there in Taysom Hill, but still better than in some of our Pete Carmichael calls last year where just completely forgot that he existed. And I'm glad that that wasn't the case this time. So again, I leave with mostly positives. You can't get too positive about a game where you only score 16 points offensively, but I think as a Saints fan, this is the type of start you wanted. Defense dominant, offense doing enough, and hoping that both improve as the season goes on. So Don says, I don't think Michael Thomas has lost any explosiveness. I think he's actually going to make more plays down the field with Carr than he did with Breeze. I got 2 comments on Michael Thomas watching the tape. I can technically turn this into more. Number one, Michael Thomas is still a good receiver in the NFL. I don't think that Michael Thomas showed week 1 elite receiver in the NFL, but he showed that he's still a good receiver in the NFL. Number 2 was it's very clear that he's not the number 1 receiver on the field in terms of the primary hot read or who is the general number 1. I think both of those things are completely okay because what I did see from Thomas is, one, there was no ego issue with Chris Olave being the guy. That there were a couple of reps that that Michael Thomas thought that should have gone his way, but none of those reps that you see Michael Thomas kind of in the film going, damn it, why did I get the ball, was because Olave was getting the ball. There were multiple reps that were that way because pass rush was getting to Derek Carr. So I love to see that because I didn't see a Michael Thomas who was worried about himself. I saw Michael Thomas who wanted to dominate and be good. And I think there's a reason that he was the first throw they made that day. And I think there's a reason that on some of the critical third downs, it was actually Michael Thomas that they went to. When they needed a big play, yeah, there were two fantastically schemed, and I even put this one or made this comment to Jeff Nowak on Twitter as we were going through film, that they drew up a beautiful play. It's a Texas concept. We actually showed it in the film study yesterday for Chris Olave. So they schemed ways for Chris Olave to get the ball and make plays. And again, I'm not taking away from him, but I do want to add that Michael Thomas produced 2 first downs for a guy that only had 5 catches, right? And it wasn't like Michael Thomas was doing deep downfield streaks. So that's what you hope to get from Michael Thomas. Chris Olave had 6 first downs as a receiver. And usually, I know everybody wants to focus on TDs, but I'm going to tell you that the first downs are almost just as important. So having the receivers move the ball there was big. And you need to see more of that because you had 12 first downs created by all the receivers combined. You only had 2 first downs created by the running game. Both of those being by Jamal Williams. That's something that's got to get better. So all this to kind of like think about as we're going through that. Definitely a lot of positives. But let's, I see my man King Art. He had just talked about Trevor Penning. And I'll say this. Trevor Penning should be further along than he is. He's had 2 full training camps. And I do think that he should be past where he is. At the same time, this is only his 2nd NFL start, and it's way too early for me to start condemning him because I'm a believer that you can't help where you were drafted. Trevor Penning was raw coming in. It's not his fault where he was drafted. Cesar Ruiz, similar circumstance. And Cesar Ruiz panned out. Hopefully Penning pans out faster. You're definitely throwing him into the fire. And Arden Key is a guy that most people won't think of as a top-end talent, but he's certainly better than I think he got credit for coming into this game because almost all of his production in the league has come in the past 3 years, even though he's been in the league 6 years. So you had really tough matchups, and I think that Trevor Penning is simply going to have to get better. I'm not making excuses for him, but I also don't expect him to come in week 2 and be a dominant player, or week 1 be a dominant player in his 2nd overall start. He does have to improve tremendously, but I don't think there's a better option anywhere. There is no better option. Like, having him be the left tackle is the only real choice you have right now, with the exception of benching him and making Hurst the left tackle and putting Anders P back at left guard. He's just going to have to get the experience, and if that means that you spend the first quarter or even half of the season chipping for him, giving him help, you're going to have to do that. Because I'll tell you right now, if you're the Carolina Panthers, your pro scouting department is already looking at how Burns can destroy Trevor Penning. Because I'll tell you this, you're going to see Burns line up against Ryan Ramczyk because Ramczyk can struggle with speed, as in a lot of tackles can. But you're definitely going to see them trying to take advantage of Trevor Penning. So you better have Foster Moreau next to him. You have Adam Prentice, Jamal Williams chipping, whoever on the outside. You better make sure that you're giving him help on the arc so that he can focus on interior sets. One of the things that I can tell that he is trying to do, so whether you take this as a good thing or a bad thing, he is trying to work on his technique. I've seen him use bucket step. We talked about that in preseason or mentioned it before. You see him trying to work on his 45. He is trying to improve on that, but he's simply doing it on the fly. He is going to be, if he pans out, a very good left tackle. He's set up best to be a left tackle. He's simply got to become that guy, and we'll see if that ends up being the case. I think that everything about Trevor Penning screams NFL left tackle. You just got to get that technique to match the physicality. And how long that takes, I can't answer. Will it happen this year? Hopefully. But I also think that you don't really have any choice if you're the Saints. You are where you're at, and you are what you are at this point. So we'll continue to roll through and see what happens, right? Alro says Trevor Penning and the coaches needed this game to show what he needs to get better at in games. Sure, yes and no, Alro. I mean, if the Saints took this game to know what he struggled at, then we have a problem. So I really hope they knew some of the issues beforehand. But at the same time, you are right that game reps are extremely valuable. And arguably one of the most valuable things he can have is game reps. And the more of those he gets, in theory, the better he should become. Because you can only get so far just being a guy who goes against the same guys, even if it is Carl Granderson and Cameron Jordan in practice, right? Going against guys who study you to break you down instead of going against your teammates are 2 different things. So these reps are very important. His issues are fixable. The only question is, how long does it take to fix these issues? And I don't have a good answer for y'all. I simply have here's where he struggles, here's why he needs to get better, and let's see if he does. The big issues for him are, you can see that he's got a great anchor when he can set it because he's an overwhelmingly physical player. I love to see that he's working on his 45. I love to see that he's even trying things like the bucket step. There's still things that he has basically not in his repertoire at all. The jump set, which Teron Armstead did so well in New Orleans for so long. He's able to get out on those elite pass rushers and get in their face immediately. You got to be very good and confident with your technique to be very good at jump setting, or you will just essentially be letting guys have free inside releases. You got to be good at it. So whatever it ends in, whatever techniques he's working on the time, he's got to have time to have those perfected. And again, it just goes back to where they're at, because let's just keep it real. All the people that I've seen saying, oh, well, let's move him inside and put Hurst at left tackle, are missing the part where Trevor Hurst and James Penning might have well been the same person, because they both looked terrible Sunday. They both immensely struggled. It wasn't like Trevor Penning was alone out there just simply getting wrecked. Hurst wasn't doing any better. Hurst also had a really rough game. So both of them have got to improve on how they played, and both of them have got to be more solid on that left side. And I think it affected Eric McCoy in the center position as well. Again, we're also talking about a very, very good interior D-line for the Tennessee Titans. So either way, you got to see the entire left side get better. And Eric McCoy, who did not have a terrible game, but he did not have a great game. All these things are going to take time, and hopefully, as long as health persists, that's the big knock on wood for us always in New Orleans. If health persists, you will see them get better, and you will see this team simply be a better team. But that's going to take time to get there. All right, real quick, because we're about 30 minutes into the show, I do want to make sure that y'all know that you have the opportunity to speak up, say, hey, what's going on? Tell me about this. Play, stat, etc. Let's hit it with it. We'll get to the chat. Big says Ruiz didn't have the best game. I thought Ruiz had a good game. I don't think Ruiz had a bad game. I don't think Ruiz necessarily dominated, but there were only a couple of reps that I thought Ruiz lost on. Overall, I thought Ruiz and Ramczyk both had very good games. Enough to where I would say it was positive. Having watched a lot of offensive line enough, it's very rare to find a game where a guy doesn't lose at least 1 or 2 reps. And that was kind of the game for Ruiz, is he had a couple of losses, but I don't feel like they were egregious losses that were just, really shining and just, it was obvious. There are plenty of plays where you actually have McCoy and even at some points Ruiz trying to help out the left side of the line, because the twist and stunt game really confused the left side of the line. They didn't have great predictors and didn't seem to notice those situations as quickly and as promptly as McCoy and Ruiz did. So I think that kind of played into some of your issues as well when it came to the reps. But I think 4 of the sacks, 2 of them were just straight beats on the outside by Trevor Penning, though. He got beat by Arden Key and just a straight wide-9 pass rush up the field, up the arc. And these are things that he's simply going to have to improve on and get better at. Lush says, how did 3 defensive linemen in the backfield that fast? Again, depends on what rep you're talking about, but there were a couple of just really bad reps. And one thing that I will say that I noticed Tennessee doing was, one, they were snap count guessing. And what I mean by that is they would guess what the count was and launch prior to actually seeing the ball move. And a couple of times they did that really well. Another thing they were doing was a lot of gap exchange. So when they weren't twisting and stunting, so a twist would be tackle to end would be the tackle attacks down and then the end wraps around them. You also saw them doing a lot of gap exchange where, normally they'd be lined up in the B gap, but then the DT would attack the A gap and the linebacker would then take their responsibility. So these type of things that when you're in the offensive position can kind of throw you off a little bit. You're expecting your guy to be right here. They actually do an exchange, and that actually now is this guy, and you actually have responsibility for the linebacker. Things like that. When you have an offensive line that has not done a ton of reps together and does not have a ton of cohesion yet, things like that can definitely provide disruption. I thought Tennessee did a great job of finding ways to make that happen. And honestly, the Saints were doing the same thing. The Saints were running a lot of twists and stunts. The Saints lined up in Demario Davis. He lined up at each individual gap as a pass rusher at various points in this game. So both defenses did that, to try to confuse the offensive lines and find that extra bit of pass rush. And I would say that both of them had, levels of success when they were attempting that. So Arnold says, I'm glad Granderson has looked good. You like him? I'm glad that Granderson is playing with a chip on his shoulder and really putting kind of everybody on notice. Like, hey, you should have not forgotten about me, should not have written me off. And I'm not saying anybody in this chat did. But I will say that for most Saints fans, when they were talking about who's going to be the starter this year, they're talking about how Peyton Turner needs to get his act together, or they're talking about the rookie that got drafted in the second round. A lot of people have forgotten about Carl Granderson, and he's making it very clear he didn't forget all that, because keep in mind the Saints also didn't have him as the lockdown starter either. So it wasn't just like I'm trying to say fans got into his head. I'm saying that he made it to where you have to start him. He's 27. He's been in the league for a few years now. He came out, had a very strong start to game one. Definitely seems like he's bigger than the 260 pounds that we studied him at 2 years ago. In fact, I had a film study on this channel. What was it, TJ? Probably 3 years ago. We had a Carl Granderson film study. That might have been 2020. We did that one. I think the season he got 5 sacks. First time we did that one. But last year's a 5.5 sack guy, is a rotational player. Comes in with 1.5 now. I'm not trying to say he's on pace for 10. I'm simply saying he came in and looked real good. So Peyton Turner was a deal on turf toe. Deal on turf toe is everybody in the league wants to get rid of all these artificial turfs, and everybody complains about them as players, how bad they are. And I have no idea if Peyton Turner is going to be around. I really don't. Those type of injuries tend to linger. And when you're a big man, Peyton Turner is not a small player. Those things don't tend to go around quickly. So have to wait and see. Gunner says, hope they get Michael Thomas involved a lot more. He was wide open in the red zone twice. One time they was wide open, the red zone was designed to go to Michael Thomas. Had the pass rush not been killing Derek Carr, that would have been a touchdown. There was a post route they had against Too High at about like the 15-yard line, if that's the play that you're thinking of. And Thomas was open. And I think that Derek Carr wanted to go there. He was reading that safety pre-snap. You can see the eye movement. But then the pass rush was immediately there. And I definitely don't want Hail Mary throws over the middle, even if it is to Michael Thomas. I'm sorry, I don't want to go back to those days. So that comes back to kind of the conversation we were just having. You got to get that left side of the field better. And that way you can have those opportunities and actually connect on them. I think Jamal Williams looked as the lead back. I thought Jamal Williams looked exactly like I told y'all he would look. He is an interior style runner, ground and pound, hard-nosed guy who is not going to break it off for 15, 20, 30, 40 yards, but he is going to move forward. And almost all of the rushing problems were not on Jamal Williams. Almost all the rushing problems were on the offensive line being problematic. So that's still an issue, man. I tried to say it in a way that doesn't sound like I'm trying to complain, because truly, I'll take a week one win no matter what. But that offensive line came in and looks to be the liability of this team. Of every positional group, that's the one that looked the worst. So that's the one that you got to see the most improvement out of. Arnold says, excited for this season. Carl looked really good, and I appreciate your film study on him. Thank you, Arnold. Again, probably get one tomorrow. I'm debating on Michael Thomas / Chris Olave. I really haven't decided yet. I do want to do a defensive film study. I think everybody kind of knows how good Demario Davis is, and I don't mean to be clickbaity, but I don't know. I try to get the guys who I think maybe don't get as much recognition. And consider that I'm trying to run a podcast and run a YouTube channel and support my family, I should probably care less about giving y'all the in-depth and maybe go for some more of the clickbait. But we'll see. Because I did not do a film study on Michael Thomas or Chris Olave over the preseason or anything. We did one on Trevor Penning, and I think we need to do another one on Trevor Penning in a couple games. But we didn't do any on the receivers, and I think they deserve a little bit of it, even though everybody wants to talk about Demario. So, what you think of Carr's pick? It was middle of the field. He made the right read, but looked like Juwan didn't bend his route. I think that interception was 100% on Derek Carr. I put this in my film study yesterday. Derek Carr talked about it himself. The read might have been middle of the field open, but up until that point, you had started seeing Tennessee Titans run Tampa 2, which actually would indicate middle of the field close unless it's a really tall climb. And situationally, with under a minute to go and the fact that they were on a 3rd and long in that situation, you have to know that underneath zones are going to drop back a good 5 yards deeper than they normally would. So the entire time, even though he saw that too high read, normally a post route will be open. In that particular situation, you're probably throwing into a gauntlet. And he recognized that immediately. He talked about it being a mistake on his part and how he got a little bit too antsy with it. He was trying to go after something. He was a little, not necessarily call him emotional, but he talked about this in the post game, and it was a mistake for him. So I think that it simply comes down to the situation of football where if that had been a 1st and 10 at the 40, yeah, it's probably a legitimately great read. But with it being a 3rd and long inside the 1 in Tennessee territory, that was screaming to get picked. The play that they should have looked for is they should look for corner routes in that instance, because you also got to keep in mind that the defense wants you to throw over the middle, because even if they don't pick it off, they're going to tackle you and you're going to start running clock, and the Saints didn't have timeouts. So either way, you should have been looking for those sideline throws that Derek Carr actually showed that he could hit multiple times in this game. That's really what I would have rather have seen them do, but yeah, they didn't. Who says, have you ever coached? I know you did some scouting. I have never pursued coaching at any level besides Pee Wee. Have I coached Pee Wee ball? Sure, but I don't count that. One, you're doing it for the kids. You're just doing it to have fun. And when I was teaching them defense, because I when I was with the Pee Wee kids, I was doing defense with them. I was giving them real simple stuff. The defensive plays were things called like bear and tiger and lion, and they're really simplistic. It was basically like one blitz, one 4-man cover, or one 4-man front, one 5-man front. I mean, it wasn't anything too wild. So no, besides Pee Wee ball, and we're not about to act like you can be a pickup basketball guy and go play in the NBA. You can't be a Pee Wee coach and coach the NFL. So yeah, let's see. That was a bad interception, but I'm glad that Carr will throw it. I can live with those every now and then as long as it doesn't happen too often. As long as he's throwing touchdowns, I'm okay with that. Big thing for me, as a quarterback, he needs to have at least twice as many touchdowns as he does turnovers of any kind. He's not there yet. Now, I do agree there should have been a touchdown call for the Rashid Shaheed first attempt that they called incomplete. But even then, I need at least a 2-to-1 ratio minimum, prefer 3-to-1. And then I'll be okay with those type of plays. Rev, what will it take for you to say, okay, let's try moving Penny elsewhere on the line? Because, one, I don't think that that's a good move from a football standpoint. Now, I'll go ahead and admit, a lot of that is the bias that I have from the people who educated me on offensive line, right? And there's one NFL coach that was at the Scouting Academy that did a lot of the teaching. And there's 3 guys that I follow really heavily through social media and also met through like the Senior Bowl and everything that I follow. And every single one of them will tell you that changing positions for an offensive lineman is almost always a bad idea. And when you just look at Trevor Penning athletically, he's made to be a left tackle. Can he be a guard? I guess you could in theory do it, but why would you want to? He's had no real time to try to be a left tackle as it is. Why would you switch him to a position that, one, you actually have depth in? Like, you have guard depth. You've got Ruiz as a starter. You got Hurst as a starter. You got good depth in both Saldivari and Pete. So you'd be taking Penning not only a position that he doesn't know, doesn't play, hasn't done in a long-ass time, and certainly hasn't trained for it for the past 2 years, and you'd be going into a position where we're talking right now having no depth, right? You got Ryan Ramczyk on the right side, but you don't like either backup option at tackle spots. And now you're talking about potentially moving Trevor Penning. So I think no matter how you slice it, it's just a terrible idea. I don't see how it can benefit the team, right? Because it's not that Penning is slow or anything. All of his issues are technique, and that's only going to come with repetition. He is just literally, if you're designing a left tackle, Trevor Penning's what you want, but the technique's got to get there. And whether it does or whether it doesn't, we'll just kind of see how it goes. See how it goes. I don't know where my super chat went, but my question was, have you seen any of the Kamara interview on Tub City? I've not. And yeah, I don't see your super chat, Charles, but I appreciate you being here and I hope you're having a fantastic day so far. But no, I did not see that. No, I haven't. So it's something I'll have to maybe check out and we can circle back on it maybe Thursday. But honest to God, haven't seen it. So can't really give a thought about it. No Cap says Ruiz and Pete were first rounders for reasons they were changed another position on the O-line. Can a Pro Bowl left guard and you want him to have a left tackle, get it what it would cost. I don't think Trevor Penning can be a Pro Bowl left guard if we're just being honest. And Cesar Ruiz was a guard when he came in. I mean, sure, he had played center, but he'd also played guard. I mean, that wasn't really a big switch, right? I mean, Honest to God, I don't get where people have gotten on this. Trevor Penning's a future Pro Bowl guard. What have they seen that makes them believe that? I don't know what, because you can project a guy to play any spot if you want to. I mean, we can project a guy anywhere. But if you're looking at Trevor Penning's athletic profile, that certainly doesn't say guard. If you're looking at him height, weight, speed, size, etc., it doesn't say guard. His history in terms of what he did in college doesn't say guard. Could he maybe learn it? Of course. I think if you give one of these athletes enough time, they can become something. I just don't see why you would want that. You know, it's not like guard's easier. You know, and I'll be honest, man. From a quarterback perspective, having a guy that's almost 6'8" standing in front of you ain't exactly easier either. I've seen it popped up a lot. I know it pops up because of injury. But Granger says, I disagree, Rev. His foot speed kicking out to pass block is terrible. Again, that's technique. I mean, there is not an athletic reason why Penning can't play left tackle because his feet aren't slow. You can see his feet aren't slow when he's moving to the second level in an outside zone run block. So the problem aren't the feet. The problem's the technique. And when you're unsure of your technique, that will slow you down, and you're simply going to struggle. But Trevor Penning is not athletically unable to play left tackle. He is technique unable to play left tackle. And the only way to fix that is time. It's the only way to fix that. And maybe he doesn't improve. And then you do have to have a legitimate conversation about, okay, what do we do here? Because if you're getting wrecked, if the guy's giving up 2 sacks a game, which is what he did in week 1, then you've got to make some type of move. But at the same time, I don't think that moving James Hurst to left tackle is the move either. I don't think you're getting any better there. So unless you got a left tackle just kind of hiding away, you kind of need him to get good. Simple as that. You need him to get good. It's pretty good. Get to learn a little bit about his upbringing and life through high school, college, and the pros. It is split into different parts, and the third part dropped recently. I'd have to check it out, Charles. That sounds very interesting. Sounds very interesting. Move says, I was kind of on Penning changing the guard because the man's feet are bad, at least in this game, and caused him to reach. Again, I think the difference is understanding that technique can be bad, but that doesn't mean the athlete is bad. Because I'll be honest, if he doesn't have good footwork and technique at guard or at tackle, he's not necessarily going to just have it at guard. If anything, he's going to have different and more responsibilities where he's going to need a good foot quickness, like pulling. You know, that's something that Pete has to do a lot, and Caesar has to do, and James Hurst has to do. These are all things that require you to be good. So the athletic part, I think, is not the question. The question is how quickly does he adapt to NFL technique? Because that's clearly where he's lacking. You know, his bucket step is slow and a little ugly. His 45 is not a crisp, quick kick out. You know, his vertical is almost non-existent, and he doesn't have a jump set. I don't think moving him fixes any problem he has, because the problem is he's the definition of raw. And the real truth of it is, in my opinion, he should never have been drafted in the first round. But New Orleans is really big on drafting all-pro talent that's actually all-pro potential. And if it pans out, you look like a genius. If it doesn't pan out, you end up struggling and complaining like we're doing here. So, truth, what most of us are frustrated with is the front office's willingness to bet on potential more than the right now. Because Davenport was a potential draft pick. I mean, you draft him in the first round. I get it. But the all-proness of him has always been potential. He's got the body profile. He's got the traits that you look for to be an all-pro. But he's never been healthy. So he hasn't got there. Peyton Turner, another guy who has the physical traits to develop into a Pro Bowl / maybe all-pro guy. You draft high, but isn't panning out because of injury. You know, these are things that you just get wrecked, and that's why it's a risk to draft these guys who are a project player that high. Some people are willing to do it. I'm not one of those guys. I would rather take a risk on a free agent guy than take a risk on drafting a guy in the draft like that. But that's just on me. Obviously, New Orleans Saints have a different style. So, Crass says Davenport is made out of glass, didn't play on Sunday. Yeah, Davenport, sadly, for him, did not play on Sunday. And That stinks. I mean, I really don't like that for him. I mean, I want success for Marcus Davenport. I really want him to be a successful player. Because it sucks to see a guy that talented not panning out. It really, to me, it does. I hate to see a guy that talented not panning out. But, I mean, look. Your new rookie defensive tackle now has the same amount of sacks this year as Davenport did last year, right? And it's where you're at now. Where you're at. Charles says maybe they can help him out, but having him out in the slot and jump the snap like the tackle from the Chiefs. I see you, Charles. I see you. Fans are concerned that Penning is going to get Carr hurt. Sure. I'm not denying that logic. But my main rebuttal is, guess what? So are half the teams in the NFL. That's most teams. Good left tackles are hard to find and they're hard to groom. I think that's just it's the sucky spot that you're in a spot where you feel like everything else around you is going well, but one of the most important positions you can't rely on right now. And that's what left tackle is. So thankfully, Derek Carr has a little bit of mobility. And we saw that Sunday. And thankfully, Pete Carmichael is recognizing the level of this issue and was scheming things to kind of help as much as they could. So, yeah. Says, I hate people that are ready to kill Penning who's had 2 career starts. I agree. And again, it goes back to expectations, right? It's not Penning's fault that the Saints drafted him so daggum high. It's just that is what it is. Because coming in, he was a raw player. But you know what? He got selected 19th overall. People expect immediate success. And it also doesn't help that Olave was immediately successful. Like Chris Olave has come in and been, I love him. I mean, he's not Michael Thomas 2019 level good, at least not yet. But dude he picked up right where he left off last year, which is great to see. So you want to see Penning doing the same thing. Yeah. Technically, the Rook has more sacks this year than Davenport had last year, 1 to 5. Well, Breezy has a half sack. Now, I do agree that the idea of half sacks is kind of silly, but Davenport had a half sack last year. Breezy has a half sack so far this year because he split his with Pete Warner. So you have 3 sacks that got registered on Sunday. Half went to Cameron Jordan, half went to Pete Warner, half went to Breezy, and then 1.5 went to Carl Granderson. So half and a half. Aaron Rodgers' injury got you scared? Hey, valid. I get it. You watched Aaron Rodgers have 75 seconds of gameplay, and due to failure on the left side, he's out. Now, I will say something real quick about that. The New York Jets are doing what I have on this podcast said for years I hate. I hate those chop blocks, technically cut blocks. Chop blocks are the illegal ones. I hate cut blocks. I think they're pointless. I think it's stupid. Why would you take a 300-pound man and throw him on the floor? All that buys you is maybe 2 seconds. I hate them. Absolutely hate them. I'm very thankful that Pete Carmichael and Marone and stuff don't use those things very often. I think they're dangerous to every player involved, and they're not even super effective. Stop trying to chop the damn knees. You got a man that's 330 pounds. Let him go hit him. Tell him to treat it like a run play. I don't care. But that's a waste of a very large, valuable resource. So I get why the Aaron Rodgers thing scares people, but I'm thankful that our team doesn't do stupid stuff like that. And I will say it's stupid to the day that I die because I hate those type of blocks. And I always have and I always will. So it's definitely way too early to say about Penning can't play. You remember Armstead struggling earlier? Armstead did struggle a little bit early on, but he still was cleaner than Trevor Penning. So, what do you think we're missing from being a serious contender? Time. Like the left side of the offensive line needs to play better, but it's more than just that. I'm not going to trust Dennis Allen, who's a career losing record head coach. I'm not going to trust Pete Carmichael after one game. I need to see it consistently being better. I need to see it's consistently being better. Does that mean I don't leave confident after this week 1? I do. I actually do leave week 1 going, the New Orleans Saints are better than their next opponent, but they still got to prove it, right? So even though and granted, the other game was a division game, but we talked all summer about how awful the NFC South was, how the NFC South was going to lose games. Well, Guess what? The Saints beat the Titans, and I think the Titans could be a playoff team this year. Tampa beat Minnesota, which was a playoff team last year. And then Atlanta beat Carolina. The only reason Carolina lost is because they played a division opponent. I'm not trying to spell doomsday that secretly the NFC South is going to reign supreme, but I am saying that they came out. They are 3-1 as a division, and there's only one other division in the NFL that did that, and that was the NFC East. So, Saints better come out and play. You believe that Demario Davis is still good in coverage? Yes, absolutely, Terrell. Absolutely. He did pretty well in coverage this past weekend. Is he perfect? No. And I'll tell you this, Pete Warner has also improved in coverage quite a bit. But yeah. Anything made before besides his interception? Well, I thought both Honey Badger and Marcus May had good games. You're not going to see a lot of them because the broadcast never shows safety play, but they did a really good job. They closed out a lot of big throws that could have happened. So I thought they did a good job. Let's see. The old man get beat, just take the penalty to let the guy get past you. Somebody like holding penalties? Maybe. Barry says, come on, man. Most of us have been watching football a long time. When we see certain things about a player, we can see when a player doesn't have it. Just like Stephon Anthony, you could tell early. Stephon Anthony is a very different case than Trevor Penning. And I always make this argument. This isn't necessarily directed to you, Granger, but it's directed to everybody. You can watch football your entire life and still not know what you're watching, right? Unless you actually went through the training and actually have familiarity with the sport. It is an art that even the people who do it every day aren't perfect at. So I think Penny deserves time because the same people said the same thing about Cesar Ruiz when I said, look, third year is the big year for development. This is the year that you could actually see him make some changes because this, and this. And it happened. I'm not saying it's going to happen with Trevor Penning. I'm just saying that you absolutely cannot know, no matter who the player is, you cannot know after 2 starts in the NFL whether they have or don't have it. It is impossible. The best scouts in any team in the NFL couldn't do that. We certainly can't do that on this podcast. So I think Trevor Penning should be allowed to see how things go. So Eugene says Demario Davis's instincts and field vision continue to be supernatural. Man was built to be a linebacker. I've said this before, and I know a lot of people kind of get squirrely on it, but Demario Davis is the best linebacker the New Orleans Saints have ever had as an instinctual linebacker. Is he the best pass rushing guy from the second level? Absolutely not. There are multiple guys who have been better than that. But in terms of the complete package, coverage, run stop, actually leading the team in terms of play calling, pass rush, he's the best linebacker this team has ever had as the complete package. I don't think you've ever seen a Saint be better as the package. Are there Hall of Fame linebackers? Yeah, the New Orleans Saints have 2 Hall of Fame linebackers. I'm not trying to disparage what they did. I'm simply saying that Demario is the best complete package of all the linebackers the New Orleans Saints have ever had. So, Billy says, thank you, Ruiz. I slandered you and you made a fool out of me. And hell, Ruiz is still not the best right guard in the NFL, but he's definitely made the move where you can feel a little bit of confidence. Where the Panthers try to attack our defense, thankfully the Saints don't have a ton of weaknesses on defense, but where they did have some communication issues were routes that need to get passed off. So anything that creates a natural rub, mesh concepts, even little things like stick and even corner flat routes on the outside or slant flat routes. Anything that creates a mesh or ends up creating a little bit of a conflict for a particular guy. Now they did better at that week 1 here, but that would be one issue. And then I would also say that you haven't seen the run defense tested as much as you actually thought they would be coming in. What I mean by that is, look, Derrick Henry still has it, as I said he would. I don't think Derrick Henry is what he was when he was 2,000 yards. Derrick Henry still got it. But the Tennessee Titans did not use Derrick Henry as many expected. Derrick Henry only ran the ball 15 times. He had 2 catches. Most people coming in this game thought Derrick Henry would have 25 to 30 touches. You got basically half that. So you still haven't seen the Saints' run defense particularly attacked to know exactly how good or bad they are truly. I would fear Atlanta a little bit more in this situation, but I also think that the Panthers deserve to get a little bit of credence there because they went out and we talked about what the Saints did. But if you remember, Carolina Panthers went and got one of the biggest names in the running back market as well. And sure, they lost, so people aren't paying as much attention to the teams that lose immediately. But in terms of like what I worry about, Miles Sanders is a good running back. Chuba Hubbard is a good running back. I mean, they have a good duo in Carolina that their biggest struggle is similar to what the Saints' biggest struggle was, is that their offensive line is problematic in week 1, right? So I would say that the run game, I'm looking at Sanders and Hubbard and going, worried about him, because they also got to worry about a rookie quarterback who will move out the pocket. I wouldn't call him a rushing first or mobile. I'd call him a quarterback with mobility. But that's probably my biggest concern going into that game, is we didn't really get to see the Saints defense test. You had a couple of Tajay Spears runs that actually did scare you and almost popped off a little bit. But you didn't have a lot of Derrick Henry running at you. You did a good versus most of his reps. But I would say that's something that I still would be curious to see how well they perform, because you have two divisional opponents who definitely are built to run the ball, and they're built to run the ball really well in Carolina and Atlanta. I'm not sold on anything to do with Tampa Bay. Kudos to them for winning, but I'm not confident in nothing in Tampa. I mean, they got some really good veteran star power on defense, but other than that, I'm not confident in their offense at all. That's the least confident in the offense I am for any team in the division. I guess they can have their defense carry them, but yeah, so that's kind of where we're at on that. Is Kendre Miller healthy at this particular second? No. This particular second, no. We'll see how he looks as we get closer to Monday. But again, those stupid lower body injuries, man. Doctor just says, I feel like they were going to ride Henry out. I was in my favorite Nashville bar, and everybody around me said the same thing. Why won't they run Henry more? I'm very curious if they're getting to the point where they're going to try to spell him and only give him, 15 to 20 touches a game so that he lasts an entire season. So I'm very curious how that ends up kind of playing out. But it worked to the Saints' advantage, but I would be real honest. Like, if I could go back in time and help out Tennessee, the one thing I would do is put the ball in Derrick Henry's hands more. I feel like they really hurt themselves by trying to rely on other guys. I mean, I'm not trying to be a Tannehill hater, but Tannehill is not a top 15 quarterback in the league, and he was forcing balls to DeAndre Hopkins way too much. I mean, and the Saints took advantage of that, and they rightly should have. But I think Tennessee did not rely on the best part of their team. I think that's why they lost. Yeah, to what Mr. Don said, though, like, even though Tampa beat Minnesota, Minnesota had almost 400 yards of offense. Minnesota was 43% on third downs. Minnesota only had 6 penalties. Not a lot. Minnesota just crapped the bed. Like, every stat line says that Minnesota should have won that game, but they didn't. Like, Baker Mayfield, for those that didn't catch the box score, Baker Mayfield went 21 of 34, which is 61.8%, for only 173 yards. Their main rusher, White, 2.3 yards per carry. That Tampa offense was not exactly moving up and down the field. Vikings crapped the bed. Now, hey, Tampa could have 12, opponent bed craps, and that's a 12-5 record. Just saying. They got a lot of questions down there in Florida. A lot of questions. Yeah. Do we stack the box against the Panthers and force Bryce to beat us? I don't think that's a bad idea. In fact, I would actually expect the Saints to continue using more base defense. We'll talk about this Thursday when we kind of do our preview episode. But that's what I would expect. JT, good to see you. Good to see you. Y'all, I love all y'all, and I hope you're enjoying the film studies. We're right at an hour. We try to cut these because we can end up talking all night about Saints football, and I love it. But we're going to cut it. If y'all want to help support the channel, check out RevJuice.com or check out PayPal, Venmo, Cash App if you want to support. I can make more film studies, dedicate more time to this the more that y'all support. Not required, but greatly appreciated. Check out the film study that we dropped on Monday. We'll try to drop another one here on Wednesday. And join the Discord if you haven't already. Who dat? God bless. I appreciate every single one of you more than I can actually properly say. But I will see y'all on the next one. Deuces. That's me.